Hey friends, last October 2019, I made a trip down to our state capital, Springfield, Illinois, to visit the offices of the Illinois Environmental Council. You can see their offices are located right down the street from the state capitol. That's kind of cool. This is my interview with Eliot Clay, the gentleman who's writing the legislation this time around. Here we go. Eliot, thank you for meeting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us a little background here on you and IEC.
Yeah, my name is Eliot Clay. I'm Illinois Environmental Council's Agriculture and Water Programs Director. So dealing with all things agriculture throughout the state, including urban agriculture and then environmental problems with traditional agriculture like nutrient loss reduction, that kind of stuff, pesticide drift, those kind of issues. I just started with IEC about a year ago, almost just in the next couple months. I worked on Senate Republican staff for 4 years before this and did the Agriculture Committee and the Environment and Conservation Committee for those guys.
Okay, cool. Tell us about IEC for people who don't know. What is IEC? What does IEC stand for? What does it do?
Yeah.
Who are you guys?
Yeah, the Illinois Environmental Council I think of as really a group of affiliates that we work on behalf on that are basically environmental organizations all over the state that focus on a number of different issues. Like I do a lot of agriculture stuff, but we also focus on environmental justice issues. So things like the ethylene oxide issue with Sterigenics up in the burbs, just water pollution problems with like things like lead and service lines in Chicago, just to give a couple of examples. But we cover everything from water to air to land to industry concerns and kind of everything in between. And what we do is help represent a lot of smaller groups at the Capitol in Springfield to help draft legislation to help protect people's public health and environmental health in general on lots of different things, and that includes drafting bills, combating against bad bills, and trying to connect local communities with their legislators in general.
So specifically at a granular level, how do you do that in your role?
Well, I'm a registered lobbyist for the Environmental Council. So, for example, if somebody has a bill idea that they want to get passed, I will look through state statute and try to find ways that we can improve or change existing law, or maybe even create a new law if something doesn't exist, and find legislators in the House and the Senate that would be good sponsors for those pieces of legislation, and to try to create avenues to get things passed and to garner support from other groups as well at the Capitol.
So you have to work directly with legislators.
Yeah, we're over there. I mean, right now as we're recording this, it's veto session over at the Capitol. We were over there all day yesterday talking to various representatives and senators about different bills that are going on. It was actually a big lobby day for us for clean energy. That's a big thing that IEC works on, is clean energy legislation. So yeah, we work directly with those guys, phone calls, in-person meetings. We do tours with them to show them things like, at least in my field, sustainable agriculture and urban agriculture and those kind of things.
Cool. When you first heard about this hoop house issue, what did you think from your background in sustainable agriculture?
Well, it's interesting because there's definitely, in agriculture in Illinois, I think most people think about traditional ag, which is like corn and soybean, big fields downstate. I mean, when you drive south of Chicago all the way down to southern Illinois, you're most likely just going to see corn and soybeans for miles and miles and miles. But there's this emerging kind of market and interest in urban agriculture and doing things not even like really super urban, but just people being able to grow stuff in their own backyards. And when I heard about your issue with whether or not you can build a hoop house on your own property, the first thing that went into my mind was, this is a property rights issue. We often deal with environmental laws that have to do with municipal control over things.
Okay.
And there's definitely, there's things that municipalities do and should have control over. But at the same time, there is a limit to how much power they should have over a person's right to do certain activities. And producing a person's own food for their family and themselves seems like something that should not be hindered as long as it's not impacting anybody else.
Yeah, that's the key.
Yeah, and I think that's a big key. And I think having a hoop house in your backyard that's wholly contained on your property is not interfering with your neighbors. That should be allowed. And just the fact that they're maybe not wanting to allow it because of aesthetic reasons or whatever they choose to say, it just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, we've been told repeatedly that this is something that should be handled at the local level.
Mm-hmm.
IEC is not an organization that works primarily at the local level, is it?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, a lot of what we do is stuff that can be applied statewide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, there have been local issues that have prompted bigger conversations, and I think this is an example of one. Although this is dealing, this all came out of the city of Elmhurst. But that isn't to say that other municipalities in the state couldn't do the same thing. And I would venture to guess that there are problems in some other towns in the state regarding the same issue that we just don't know about yet. Mm-hmm. They haven't had the resources to contact people, or they've been put down so bad by their local governments that they just throw their hands up and say this isn't worth it, and they just give up on it.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, I'm sure, and it can be really frustrating, But in having said that, we do. I think as local as an issue this is with Elmhurst, I think it deals way more broadly with something that should be a statewide norm, that people should be able to do this.
Would you consider it when you refer to property rights before, so property rights are a type of right, so you would consider the right to cover your crops an actual right, like for all Illinois residents?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's already laws on the books that protect the rights of traditional agriculture in this state.
Yeah.
And you think about how much property, like square footage wise, that covers in the state. I mean, it's like thousands of miles, like square miles of property that's just dedicated to ag.
Yeah.
But then to turn around and say that all of this commercial ag is protected, all this stuff's being exported out of state, and then to have a local resident that wants to garden during the winter months to just have fresh produce and say that they can't do that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, it's like property rights should apply to everybody, not just a select group of people.
Right.
Yeah. Especially when it's not impacting anybody else.
Right.
Every time somebody brings us an idea, we want to kind of vet it out a little bit because some ideas, unfortunately, are better than others. We've had people that have approached us about things that we're just like, that's something that we legally can't mess with, or it might be counterintuitive to other things that we see as priorities.
I see.
But I think this is one we've been really, IEC obviously is an environmental organization.
Right.
And one of the things I think we've wanted to focus on recently is giving people the ability, giving people the ability to grow their own vegetables has a twofold thing. One, I think it's great that people are learning more and more how to support themselves on food system wise. But as another foil to that, this is also gonna divert resources from local. Having your ability to grow your own food is great. One of the things that's a byproduct of that is that you're relying less on the transportation of goods to stores and that kind of thing, which in turn cuts down on things like CO2 emissions just from transportation aspect. I mean, Illinois imports 95% of the food that we eat.
That is so crazy.
Yeah,
Laura
to
told
think
me
about.
that yesterday when I talked to her. I was like, we're in the middle of the Midwest.
Yeah, you think about that. I mean, agriculture is probably one of, if not the biggest economic driver in the state. And to think about the fact that we import 95% of the food we eat shows how agriculture is no longer local like it used to be.
Right.
It used to be about feeding communities and feeding people that were near you.
Right.
And that is something that's been lost. And with that has come some really just negative changes in agriculture. It's become a commodity.
Talk about that, because like I'm not so aware from the food systems side.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was more interested in it as a mom.
Yeah.
Frankly, I was just interested in clean food and providing for my family.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't thinking about the global food system when I went
Yeah.
to survey.
Yeah.
But now that we've been advocating for this so long, I am becoming aware there are so many other implications. Can you give us an idea of what some of those ramifications are to, you know, on a bigger scale?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just as an example, yesterday, like I said, we're in the veto session right now. There was a subject matter hearing in the House Agriculture Committee that was a joint hearing between Agriculture and the International Commerce Committee, I believe is what it's called, that basically was about how international trade and trade in the domestic market for agriculture is affecting the agriculture industry in Illinois. With that, a lot of the conversation was about things like exporting of soy to China, things that have been going on with the trade war with the Trump administration. And it highlighted a few different things. One, agriculture is just a massive industry in the state because of just soy and corn. So those were basically a mono ag market at this point. There's only two different things. But at the same time, there's been a huge influx of farmers that are going bankrupt all over the state. Not just in Illinois, but also in Iowa, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan, all the Midwestern states.
Why?
I think a big reason of that is because, like I said, Illinois and a lot of these other states are focused solely on corn and soy. Those two markets have been hurt very badly by both the increasing problems with trade on an international scale with countries like China, but also a changing climate. There have been numerous flooding and drought events the last few years. I mean, I think this harvest season, there's still people pulling corn out of the ground. It's almost November.
Right. I had snow coming down here this morning.
Yeah, which is very abnormal.
Yeah.
And there's still crops in the ground. They should have been pulled a month ago.
Yeah.
They're, I think, projecting right now that crop yields are going to be down about 15% this year. And this was an actual quote from somebody in the committee yesterday, that this was probably the worst planting year for farmers, for some people, in their lifetimes.
Wow.
And when you figure that the average age of most farmers right now in Illinois is like around like early 60s, late 50s, that's saying something.
Yeah.
And with this changing climate and everything, we have to wonder, like, if corn and soy is it, should that be it?
Right.
Do we need to diversify what we're doing?
Right.
And that is something that IEC has been really interested in, and me personally. With the changing climate, we have to start thinking about if there's other things that we can produce that can be more resilient to adverse climate changes. And also, more generally speaking, back to the trade side, like I said, Illinois imports 95% of what we eat. I think we need to really sit down and think about if the agriculture commodity system is broken.
Yeah.
All these farmers are going bankrupt because of all these trade problems and just bad weather and everything else. But there could be an easy solution to that, in the sense that there could be a market here in Illinois for specialty crops and things that traditionally aren't grown in Illinois but could be.
Can you explain what specialty crops are?
Yeah, specialty crops would be things like, walnuts, different kinds of perennial vegetation and grains.
Food that we eat.
Yeah, food that we eat.
Yeah.
And especially there's a really big growing market for organics, vegetables and fruits. And those could be things we can grow in Illinois. There's people doing it now. It's a very small percentage of the market, but it is happening. And there's a big opportunity for that. If we could promote a system that gives farmers, more diverse crops to grow, that might be easier to maybe grow with this changing climate and everything, that could in turn help feed local communities like public schools, hospitals, those kind of things. There's a market there. And you could save on things like just like transportation costs in general, because like I said, we import all this stuff. A lot of what we're paying for is just the gas to get it from point A to point B. And often it's not just point A to point B, it's like point A to Z and every other stop in between.
During which time the food quality doesn't necessarily go up.
No, it does not.
So the food quality is going down, and there's additional cost to it. So, okay, let's talk about the commercial food system. You're talking about farmers being benefited by the diversification of crops. But maybe someone could make the argument it's enough that farmers be able to diversify crops. Why should homeowners have access to this year-round growing? Why do they need it? If commercial farmers can do it, then the homeowners can just go to Whole Foods.
Yeah, I mean, they could, except the fact that there are, especially, I think in urban areas in this state, and a lot of rural areas as well, there are these phenomena called food deserts, which has become more and more of a problem. Essentially, that local residents do not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And it's ironic, you think about these old farming towns and that kind of thing. There used to be farmers markets all the time, and those have gone by the wayside in a lot of ways. Now, there are still farmers markets around the state that are trying to push this, but places like in the, the south and west side of Chicago, there might not be a grocery store that has fresh fruits and vegetables that is like easily accessible to residents. And this is adversely impacting low-income neighborhoods, a lot of people, just people of color, different immigrant status and those kind of things. And giving somebody the ability to be able to grow stuff locally for their community and themselves is huge. And it used to be part of our culture. It's just the commercialization of ag has very much changed how people think about where our food comes from.
I'm starting to get the sense that in addition to being a right to grow your own food, which in this climate requires crop protection, there's also practical implications for all demographic groups, whether it's lower income or, our specific situation in Elmhurst is not a food desert per se, but I certainly would like to have the choice of the variety of lettuce that I purchase beyond the 2 available at Costco and the 4 available at Whole Foods, or Whole Paycheck, as they call it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about our first attempt at passing this bill last legislative session. I guess that's January 2019 to May 2019. So this was my first time working on a bill, and I was very encouraged by our supporters' degree of organization, and when it came time for the bill to be heard in committee, we were able to get a lot of witness slips. I think we wound up with over 1,800. The opposition to our bill didn't get close to that many witness slips. How does that work? Like, our bill didn't pass or even get out of committee, even though we had a large multiple of the number of opposition witness slips. Why is that? Can you tell us about the process?
And I think, and this highlights, I think, generally the importance in Illinois legislature, and probably every legislature in every state and at the federal level, about political power. Illinois Environmental Council is a really well-respected environmental group. Generally, when stuff gets brought up, people ask us like what we think about it, if we'll slip in support or oppose something, those kind of things. But when you look at witness slips for your bill, for example, like you said, we had over 1,800 people that signed on as supporters. The vast majority are just private citizens from around the state that felt adamant about this and wanted to voice their support. On the other hand of that, you had the opposition's witness slips, and like you said, was very, very few compared to us. I mean, it was maybe 50 or less. But all of those were comprised of things like individual municipalities like Elmhurst and some other ones, plus groups like the Illinois Municipal League. Now, Illinois Municipal League on its own is a very, very heavy hitter in the General Assembly. This is the kind of group that generally they represent pretty much every municipality in the state, big and small. So whenever they issue an opinion on a bill, people will usually sit up and listen, because more often than not, they're going to have municipalities and cities in their districts that are represented by the IML, the Illinois Municipal League. So,
So the IML, just to be clear for people listening, the IML is representing the municipal governments.
Mm-hmm.
I should not, as a resident, assume then that the IML is representing me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so...
Yeah, because the IML, the big, one of the laws that they really keep a close eye on is the Illinois Municipal Code. One of the things that we propose doing with the Hoop House legislation is trying to put stuff either in the municipal code or putting in language that says that the bill would preempt what's the word I'm looking for?
Home rule?
Yeah, it would preempt home rule governments from being able to impose rules that would restrict the construction of hoop houses if they met these certain criteria. And the IML is adamantly opposed to home rule preemption in the vast majority of instances. There are some times where they will give on it if it's a safety issue or something like that. But when it comes to general stuff, they usually will fight very, very hard against it. Mm-hmm. So when they slipped in opposition, legislators took notice. Mm-hmm. And as unfortunate, it's like I wish witness slips were a numbers game, because we would have won by, a mile. Yeah, yeah, we would have won by a landslide. It wouldn't have been a competition.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show, I mean, when you're advocating for policy in Springfield, that there are a handful of groups that have a lot of political clout.
Yeah.
And it can be kind of disappointing, because we were, and I was optimistic too about all of this. But when it comes down to getting something in committee, and then you start having the pressure from these groups, it becomes evident really clear that numbers aren't everything.
Right.
A lot of it is political pressure, and really, I think the need to try to negotiate with people, which I know you've tried to do with Elmhurst as a city a lot, and have not made a lot of headway just because of where they're standing on this. But yeah, it just highlights kind of the way, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, legislatures work. I'll say this: anytime you talk to a legislator, like for instance, we had a lobby day yesterday.
Yeah.
I was chauffeuring people around, showing them around the Capitol. And if I would have gone up to one of them and just said, hey, I want to talk to you about clean energy, they'd probably just been like, oh, okay, it's okay. But I would preface the conversation every time by saying, like, hey, I've got a couple of people that live in your district in such and such town. And they would light up and be like, oh, okay, yeah, because they want to talk to constituents. That's their bread and butter. It's who votes for them.
Okay, so that makes a big difference.
It makes a very, very big difference. You have to personalize these issues in a way for them. Mm-hmm. Just by mentioning, like I said, just getting people that are in their districts is big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our bill was presented in January. It went to committee. We submitted witness slips, and it died in committee. Mm-hmm. So where do we stand now? Like, do you have to start all over again?
Yeah.
What's the context of how we move forward?
Yeah, basically right now, so that bill is, like you said, essentially dead in committee, so it's not going to move anywhere. But that doesn't mean we can't do anything. So that was just the one session there. That was 2019. Right now, we are gearing up for 2020, I've got a lot of different bills that I am going to be either redrafting or making new drafts of, including this right to garden idea and the hoop house in general. So what I've started doing is thinking about reasons that the IML was opposed last time, and whether there are things we can do in the drafting of this language that may ease them off a little bit. They're very concerned about things like whether or not a hoop house could, impact things like municipal right-of-ways or like utilities, those kind of things.
The regulations.
Zoning regulations, like disposition of water from these types of structures, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And thinking more in a concrete way, because even though the IML was opposed to this last time, and we can paint them as like, the big bad guy in this whole David and Goliath kind of idea, a lot of the time it is very helpful to try to come to a compromise.
Yes.
Because I understand, we have to understand where they're coming from. They're trying to protect their members, and it's not like they're the boogeyman. They've got their own agendas too, like just as we do.
Sure.
And it's good to try to, even sit down with them and just say, like, what can we do to make this easier for you guys?
Sure.
To either support or just go neutral on.
Sure.
Just to not oppose it.
So my understanding from talking to different legislators is that this issue of zoning is the primary concern, that we would be undermining, not just in this instance, the ability of the municipal government to regulate zoning in their particular communities, but that it would open the door to weaken the power going forward of that government to manage things in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
So I have always said to legislators when I'm talking to them, that was never my intent. And throughout this whole process, before I met you and was working with IEC, we've always been very clear with the city of Elmhurst. We'd be happy to situate our hoop house within the existing zoning regulations, setbacks, maximum lot coverage, utility line interference. So that was kind of a surprise to me, because we never challenged the local zoning regulations in that way in our community. So if the state legislation was to address some of those things, do you think it would make a substantive difference in terms of state legislators being comfortable to support it?
I think it could, because like you were just referencing, the IML will try to grab onto this, or the municipalities will try to grab on this, specifically Elmhurst, and say that we're trying to mess with their zoning ordinances, which is something they have an exclusive right under the Illinois Municipal Code. And also, like you said, we have no intention with messing with zoning regulations for city governments. That's not something the IEC messes with really at all. 99% of the time, unless it's some special issue.
So you guys would recommend to me, even in a best case scenario, that I would situate my hoop house according to the lot setbacks and the maximum lot coverages, etc. That would be your recommendation to me, not to try to mess with
We
that.
do not want to infringe on a municipality's right to zone how they need to protect property and for safety concerns and whatever else.
So as you're working on the legislation, the writing of it, that's you this time, right?
Yep.
So you think there will be specific language this time that will clarify that?
Yeah. What I'm thinking at this point, this is still a work in progress, that I want to put in explicit language that says this bill under no circumstances will affect a municipality's right to zone for all of these different things that they care about. And which was our intent all along.
Sure.
But the wonderful thing about politics and legalese and everything else is that a lot of the times it's better just to spell it out.
Okay.
Making assumptions about laws that aren't clear is how you get into things like massive lawsuits and things like that.
Right.
And having to have courts interpret laws that might not be very explicit.
Right.
And I think this time I would want this to be as explicit as possible.
Yeah. Okay.
Because even if we make it very explicit and let's say a group still opposes this bill, we can point to the language to legislators and be like, look, this is not going to impact what they're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
This is just allowing somebody to have a temporary growing structure in their backyard that doesn't impact anybody.
Like how does this process usually go, and are we sort of on par for the regular,
Yeah.
How does it usually go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, when I worked in the center for 4 years, I'd say the vast majority of bills were pretty clean cut. A lot of them came from agencies that were cleanups to statute, things that people missed when they passed an original bill, things that are pretty innocuous, stuff that regular folks wouldn't really care about for the most part. But any new policy is going to have challenges.
Okay.
You have to have it vetted by all these different organizations. And make sure it's up to snuff legally. The biggest policies I've seen aren't something that you just introduce and they get passed.
Okay.
For example, something like they just legalized cannabis this year. This has been a discussion that's been going on for years. There have been people that have introduced bills to try to do this in the past and have not made it at a committee. Some of them haven't even gotten called in committee. A lot of them haven't. But you have to wait for the right time to be able to do some of this stuff. And occasionally it's not even just about timing. It's just about getting all of these groups in line to vote for something. And that takes time. Sometimes it can take years.
I wonder sometimes, just side note, like, we haven't had the unfortunate experience of being in any particular crisis or disaster, a tornado or a hurricane or a flood or anything like that, or some man-made disaster or crisis or emergency, but many people have. And when that happens, my brother, who used to live in Boston, now lives in New Hampshire, he sent me photos when Sandy went through, and like, you couldn't get food at a store.
Yeah.
It just wasn't available. The delivery routes were on such schedules, and people were so nervous because you can see weather coming now. So the stores were picked clean days before it hit, and the deliveries don't come every day, right? So I wonder if particularly city mayors and city managers have a parcel of their thought where they think about disaster readiness, so to speak, if you call it that. How resilient is the community in the event of an emergency, whatever the type of emergency is? And the diversification of not just the crops, but the source of the crops.
Yeah.
And where is the food in the time? Like, if everybody had a little larder of canned food, or with a hoop house, I don't can the food. I have root crops available all winter because the soil is not frozen.
Yeah.
You have, it's like a savings account.
Yeah.
In time of emergency. And I wonder if mayors and managers think at that level. There is a natural resiliency that comes from that, which does touch on things of their concern.
Yeah.
Again, we're not in Hurricane Alley or whatever, but one never knows. Right?
Yeah.
Like with the flooding this year or whatever.
No, absolutely.
Do you think that's a reasonable line of thinking?
No, I think it is. It's not something I've really thought about much, but as you say that, I mean, I think it totally makes sense. I think cities in general would want to be somewhat self-reliant in the sense that if something happened, they would have the means to be able to fend for themselves, and they have citizens take care of themselves.
Does everybody want to wait for FEMA?
No, I don't think everybody does.
I'm just, I'm glad they're there. But, it's like calling for an ambulance and they say it's 2 hours out.
Yeah. No, it's true.
You want anybody closer?
And I mean, just in a kind of one thing I'm thinking about as you're saying this, out in California right now, there are massive power outages.
No, I hadn't been following.
Because, the company PG&E out there manages a massive amount of the electricity in the state. And there have been massive wildfires in recent years, and a lot of those have been caused by PG&E equipment that has been sparking because of high winds and those kind of things.
Okay.
So PG&E this year has decided whenever these wind events come up, we're going to shut down the power. What this has caused is
Oh.
massive, huge amounts of communities to be without power for days. And it is frustrated a lot of people, obviously, because one, they're like, why aren't there other means for us to be able to power our towns?
Yeah.
And people have started really thinking about, at this point, whether there should be local solutions
Yeah.
to prevent stuff like this from happening.
Yeah.
And this reliance on this outside network, or in this case, an electrical grid.
Yeah.
But in the same token, I think that same argument could be made towards food systems.
Right.
That network and grid of food systems that supplies, like I said, 95% of the stuff we eat in this state.
Yeah.
If something happens to some of that infrastructure, there could be huge problems.
Because we're exporting 95% of what we grow here, and these two things are not necessarily related, right? But they are true. 95% of what we grow is exported because most of it's not specialty crops or human food. But then we're also importing 95% of what we eat. And most of what we're importing is coming from California, Mexico, warmer climate, right?
Yeah.
So if the growers in California had power outages for a long time and they couldn't, for example, pump water to wash their crops or something like that, that does impact us.
Oh yeah, it definitely can. It'll impact food prices. It'll impact food availability to people. And that's why we need to think about, and back to the whole diversifying our crops as a state.
Right.
I have nothing against trade, international, deals that do stuff, because it does produce income from our state that's really needed to, pay for, critical infrastructure that we need.
Sure.
But at the same time, I don't think it is healthy for us to be so reliant on that system.
Sure. I'm just thinking of the term backup that we use so much with our computers. Like, you back up your phone.
Yeah.
You back up your hard drive. You have redundancies because sometimes hard drives go bad.
Yeah, and I know if I lived in one of those communities in California without electricity, the first thing I'd be buying is a backup generator.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Same idea. Backup.
That would be the first thing I would go buy. After seeing all this,
we didn't talk about that much. I mean, we talked about it in the context of sustainability and property rights when we were at the municipal level at 16 different public meetings. But I don't think we challenged the mayor and city manager directly to consider the stability of the food system in the event of a crisis.
No, and we didn't.
That's not something that we challenged them in terms of their specific job requirements. Like, part of running the city is to make sure that the city can manage through a bumpy time, because we all see through modern communications what happens when cities are not ready to deal. Like, we've all seen it too many times, right? Maybe I should keep that in mind. In any case, that's all I have. Thank you very much for your time, Eliot. I really appreciate you speaking with me.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And I'm excited to see where this all goes. We'll keep plugging away and see if we can make some progress.
Thank you.
Yeah.